How have I spent the night?
Yeah.
So, well, I actually went to bed so that I would be fresh this morning because I knew we wouldn't have results until this morning. So I got up early this morning and started looking to see who had won.
And what was the first impression this morning?
My first impression was about the House race, so that the Democrats have taken back control of the House, which is very important in order to reestablish some balance in the government, because in the last few years, the Republicans have controlled both the House and the Senate, the executive branch with the presidency, and also the court system. The Supreme Court has become more conservative because the Senate is the branch that appoints the Supreme Court justices. So this will reestablish some balance and some control. I mean, and the whole basis of the U.S. government is a checks and balances.
So is that like a success for Democrats, or doesn't it change anything?
Oh, it's a big change. So it's a big success. So I think we can be very happy. Also, the types of candidates that ran, we have so many women candidates and people of color that ran for office and won in this election. We have some really exciting people, and a lot of young people have come into the electoral process because of that. And we have, like, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, who's the youngest member of Congress now. She's only 29 years old, and she won her race. We have also the races for the state level. We've been successful in many places. So the governorship in Kansas and the governorship in Michigan, which were in Republican hands, very conservative Republican hands, have now been won by women Democrats, Democratic women. So that should be really great. We have had some losses on this side in the Senate. So it looks like we may lose a few seats in the Senate, which of course we would prefer not to. There were some very close races, and there were a lot of controversies over voter suppression, and that may have been an issue in some of those races too, I believe. And there's still we don't have all the results from the West Coast, because the polls closed later in the West Coast. But in the East Coast, some of the races that have been really in the news a lot, like the Georgia governor's race with Stacey Abrams, who was running against the Secretary of State. This race is still very close, and I saw from the news this morning that it looks like it may go to a runoff election. But I heard her speak this morning, and she was still very enthusiastic, So I think that one may also be successful in the end.
I also heard the speech of the President Donald Trump this morning, and he also said that it was a success for him. So, of course. But what does it mean right now? What does exactly change with the House that is now in the Democratic hands?
Well, so many times if you have a bill that comes before the legislature, it has to be approved by both houses of Congress. So when you have both houses in control by one party, then there's not much chance for any negotiation. It gives the ability to work in a more bipartisan way, because they have to concede sometimes, or in order to win, to win passage of a certain bill. And in this way, then there will be hopefully more of a discussion between the parties.
And in which kind of topics do you think President Trump will be a little bit, settled down or zurückhalten?
I don't know if he's capable of settling down, but because it seems to be his nature, it's his approach to try to stir up the passions of his base with a lot of, I think, racist rhetoric. And he has tendencies to a very autocratic approach to government. And I don't expect him to change very much.
So although it's a success for you, it doesn't change anything?
It does change, yes. It changes, for example, health care. And so the Republicans had proposed to try to rescind the health care bill. And Americans are desperately in need of universal health care. There are many Americans that are not covered. The latest, Mitch McConnell, who has been the leader in the House, had proposed to remove the coverage for pre-existing conditions, which is a huge issue for many Americans. And I think this was a major issue that brought people to the polls, because even Republican voters realize that they need health care also. And Also the tax issues, because a big tax bill was passed when both houses were controlled by the Republicans that gave tax relief only to the very wealthy. And hopefully now we will have some more balance and maybe tax relief for middle class and lower income voters. And also support of services that, infrastructure and services that Americans really need.
Just a little bit another topic. You are very engaged in getting people voting, especially people who live abroad like you. Why is this so important? Why do you engage yourself?
Well, there are approximately 9 million Americans that are living overseas, and we estimate 6.7 million that are eligible to vote. In Switzerland, probably over 50,000 Americans who are eligible to vote in U.S. elections, and overseas Americans have in the past been the deciding vote in many close elections in the U.S. And we also feel that as Americans overseas, we're exposed to many different governments, and we have a different perspective than people that are living only in the U.S. and have not been exposed to other systems. For example, we have a project where we surveyed healthcare systems around the world and put together a book that interviewing where different Americans have talked about their healthcare experiences under universal healthcare. Like in we have examples from Switzerland and also other countries. And so Switzerland doesn't have public healthcare; they have a private system, but it is universal, with a mandate for coverage from everyone. And this is kind of close to what the U.S. was moving towards, but they don't have a mandate, and then not everyone is covered yet. And then other systems like in the U.K. where they have a national health service. So we put together a survey where we have over 500 different examples from Americans that were able to get health care coverage living overseas and are afraid to move back to the U.S. because they're afraid that they won't be covered, either for pre-existing conditions or because the coverage is so restrictive in the U.S.
And do you have been successful? Did they vote?
Yes, we have. I don't know the exact figure yet, and we don't always get good statistics from the U.S. government, but we estimate that probably 7 times more overseas Americans voted in this election. So it's a huge effort, and we have 150,000 volunteers and members worldwide, working in over 150 countries to register voters. We also have a huge telephone banking operation where we call voters and remind them and explain to them how they registered to vote.
It's a huge effort.
It's a huge effort. So we have people that have been on the telephone, for hours for the last few months, and we also hold events where we try to publicize a little bit to Americans their right to vote. A lot of Americans overseas don't realize that they have the right to vote, especially Americans born overseas. So like my daughter, for example, who's born in Basel. A lot of people in her situation don't realize that they are allowed to vote in U.S. elections.
And do you think this effort is more important these days because of Trump?
Oh, I think it's always important, but especially now because I think democracy is really on the line. I think that he's clearly indicated that he doesn't believe in the democratic process, and I think it's really critical now. And I think it's encouraging that we see so many young people getting involved in the process, but we need more of that. And so we also, so any way we can to reach out to Americans in Switzerland and other countries around the world, we appreciate. Yeah.
And how do you look in the future of the U.S.? I mean, next 2 years, President Trump will be there, maybe more. And how do you look in the future of your home country?
Well, I'm worried, but I'm also optimistic because it's my basic outlook. And otherwise, I wouldn't keep working. But we were very disappointed after the last election and shocked, actually. But we kept working in the last 2 years, and we see some good results from that work. And we'll do the same things for the next 2 years. We're already talking about, we had a meeting last night to organize for the next year. So we're already working towards the future and finding more of those Americans in Switzerland that we can help to vote next time. We have a website that we've set up that makes it very easy for people to register to vote and to request their ballot. And Americans overseas have to do that every year, every election year. So some people don't realize that if they registered years ago, they think they don't have to do it again. It's not like in Switzerland where you automatically are set your ballot. which is a fantastic system. I think the U.S. should move in that direction. But right now it's not that way. And we also do a lot of lobbying and a lot of discussion with the state election commissions and the federal election commission on how to improve the process. And often we've had very good cooperation on that to make the forms easier, to make it less bureaucratic, make it easier for people to vote by mail or by fax. And many states now allow that. So that's a big improvement. I mean, some people were still able to register to vote yesterday and send in their vote, even from overseas. So I think we had 5 states that still allowed that. So we were still pushing yesterday for people to vote. And now for the next year, we'll just be working on trying to find these Americans and get them into our, into our radar so that we can remind them. We have a database, and we're an organization. We ask people to join Democrats Abroad, and it's at democratsabroad.org. And they can join Democrats Abroad, and then we will remind them to vote, and we will give them information about voting that will make it easier the next time.
So your work is to make people voting and not to work against Trump?
No, I mean, we help everyone vote. So we register Republicans, independents, anyone. So whenever we hold a voter registration event, it's always completely nonpartisan. And we do a lot of events in venues where we don't even talk about, the Democratic Party. We don't support particular candidates. Even when we're in the primary process, we never endorse candidates. So we're always open, but our focus is completely on helping people vote, from all walks of life, from all orientations. So we think that the more people that participate in the process, the better. You have more informed voters,